In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to implement the login. So let's go to login.component.ts. We have a very basic component. In the constructor, we have two dependencies. One is the router and the other is our auth service. Now here in this sign-in method, we get this credentials object, which is the value behind our form. So just to refresh your memory, let's go to login.component.html. On the top here, look at this form element. I've declared this template variable f and set it to ngForm. And then when submitting this form, I've passed f.value to our sign-in method. So the value of this form is an object with two properties, email and password. Okay? Now back in our login component. So here in the sign-in method, we call the login method of auth service and pass the credentials. Now this returns an observable. So we subscribe to that. If the result is truthy, we navigate the user to the home page. Otherwise, we set invalid login to true, and we use this field to toggle a validation error. So once again, back to login.html. You can see here we have a div for displaying this message, invalid username and or password. And we render this only if invalid login is true. Okay? Now back to our login.component.ts. So we shouldn't really change any code here, but we should go and have a deeper look at this login method of auth service. So let's go to auth service. Here in the login method, you're sending a post request to this endpoint. And in the body of the request, you're including the credentials, which is an object with two properties, email and password. Now, as you know, this post method returns an observable of response. But in our login method, I don't want to expose a response object. I want to return a true or false, okay? So here we're going to use the map operator. So we map this observable, get the response, and then convert it to true or false, okay? So let's go on the top, import this operator, rxjs, add, operator, map, okay? Now, before going any further, here in the login method, let's just display this response object in the console. So console.log response.json. Save, back in the browser. Let's go to the login page and log in with mosh@domain.com as the email and 1234 as the password. Log in. Now don't worry about this validation message. Let's take a look at the console. So this is the object that we get from our server. So when we build the backend for our applications, in case of a valid login, we should return a JSON web token. And this is the JSON web token that I hard-coded in our mock backend, okay? Now let's see what happens when we supply invalid credentials. So back here, I'm going to send an invalid email address, sign in. Once again, look at the console. This time we get null. So back in our auth service, in our mapping function, I'm going to get this response, convert it to JSON, and store it in a variable called result. Now here, if result is truthy, if it's an object, and it has a property called token, we want to store it in our local storage. So here in JavaScript, we have local storage dot set item. This method takes two parameters, key and data. And as you can see, they're both string. So as the key, I'm going to pass token. And as the value, I'm going to use result.token. So the token that we get from the server. So if this is a valid login, in our mapping function, I want to return true. So we are mapping a response object to a Boolean. Okay? Now, otherwise, if this is not a valid login, we want to return false. Let's test the application. Back in the browser, I'm going to log in with a valid email and password. We are redirected back to the home page, so that seems to be working. Now let's open up Chrome Developer Tools. and go to the Application tab. Here under Storage, you can see we have Local Storage. And if you expand this, you can see we have a separate storage per website. So here's the storage for our Angular application, hosted at localhost port 4200. Look, in this storage, we have this key value pair. The key is token, and the value is our JSON web token. So to recap, when the user logs in, we should send a POST request to an API endpoint to validate their credentials. If the credentials are valid, we should get a JSON web token and store it in the local storage. And then it's better to return a Boolean instead of a response object. Finally, in our login component, we get that Boolean, and depending on its value, we either navigate the user to a different page, which is often the home page, or display a validation error. This is how we implement the login. Next, I'm going to show you how to implement the logout.